Nobody wants to be alone at the end of the world. I was on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by hundreds of people, but it definitely wasn't as comforting as it sounds. I was also in a prison cell. The hundreds of people were all heartless guards, a few dozen other workers, and then fellow inmates, as desolate as me, or almost as dangerous as the threats about to hit us. Everything started during an ironically peaceful night. The cells around me were all quiet, and I had a perfect view of the moon from the small window in the back wall of my cell. I was used to serving my time patiently, and with resignation, I had accepted my penance. I was there because of a drunk driving incident that resulted in the death of an innocent woman. I would carry that guilt forever, but I never tried to make excuses for myself, and so I had no anger in me to direct at my situation. I was pretty much a ghost with no purpose. Until that night. The full moon was bright on the dark sky, speckled with stars. I was mesmerized. It was the most beautiful sight I had seen in a while. Then, there was that light. It was as if someone was pointing a flashlight directly at the moon. I lost sight of the stars. The moon changed colour to a deep and unnatural silver. And then, for just a second, so quick that if I had blinked at that moment I would have completely missed it, the moon was illuminated by a fiery orange colour. For one instant, the moon looked like it was set on fire. The next second, the moon had completely and absolutely disappeared from the sky. I stayed by the window for a few minutes, trying to understand what had happened and waiting for the moon to show up again. But no such luck. No stars. No moon. Nothing. Everything beyond my window darkened considerably. But what could I have done? I was locked in that cell. I didn't even have a cellmate at that time. I convinced myself that it must have just been a meteorological phenomenon that I didn't understand. Perhaps it was a special event, an extraordinary eclipse that everyone in the world had been looking forward to, and I was just among the disgraced people unconnected from society that didn't know about it. And I was just lucky enough to catch it at the right time. Either way, I went to sleep with a trace of anxiety in my chest, but to be honest, that wasn't unusual while living in prison. The real unusual thing started the next day, if I could even call it that. I was startled awake by the guards waking us all up. I was deeply confused and expected some kind of emergency, believing that they were waking us up in the middle of the night, but that wasn't the case. The lights were turned on to make up for the fact that there was pretty much no light coming from the windows. It was 6 a.m. and still pitch black, as if it were midnight. This wasn't your regular cloudy day. In fact, there were no signs of clouds at all, let alone the sun. This was something different, something strange and ominous. Still, our day tried to go on as usual. Breakfast in the dining hall, then working on our assigned tasks until lunch, working for a few more hours, then a brief period of free time in the courtyard, dinner, special activities like religious services, therapy, medical revisions, and then back to sleep. But that day, everything started to change. Everyone in the prison noticed the sun hadn't come up. The strange, homogeneous darkness in the sky was impossible to miss and very hard to accept as something normal. People were asking too many questions. Some inmates started getting rowdy. The less emotionally stable ones were becoming a problem. During lunch, the warden of the prison was forced to make a speech.
"Attention everyone,"
he said, and the guards had to intervene in the dining hall to make everyone listen.
"I'm sure you all have noticed the peculiar weather conditions we're dealing with today. It's nothing you should worry about, and nothing you can complain about. So, I suggest all of you do your best to ignore it and go on with your day. Any disturbance will be dealt with accordingly. We'll be back to normal tomorrow. Thank you. Have a good night. Day. Have a good day."
Here's the thing. If the warden thought his speech would be reassuring and listened to by everyone in the prison, he was dead wrong. Not everyone was as apathetic as me. During the afternoon, the power went out. Our prison used solar panels for energy, but the batteries had run out, and they hadn't been able to recharge since the previous day. This meant that by the time we had our off-duty period in the courtyard, almost everyone was keyed up and getting aggressive. The inmates were demanding answers and not believing a word when the guards swore they had no idea why the sky was black as coal. People tried to take advantage of the lack of illumination, and fights started to break out all over the courtyard. Eventually, and unsurprisingly, the warden decided to cut our day short and send everyone back to their cells. Being locked up again only made things worse, though. We were in for a long night, quite the opposite of what we needed. One inmate that screamed about the imminent apocalypse inspired another one to cry out about conspiracy theories, which made a few more yell at them to shut up, and in a matter of minutes, we were a pathetic circus. Loud, angry, and confused. It was one of the worst nights I had experienced in that place. I couldn't wait for it to be over. The next day, well, it felt wrong to call it the next day. There was no day to speak of. A few hours had passed, and the guards woke us up at the same time as usual, or so we chose to believe. But when I jumped out of bed to look out the window, nothing had changed. It looked just as it did when I saw the moon disappear. No sun. No clouds. Nothing. The world was dark, lifeless, and unrecognizable. I wasn't sure if it was darker or if it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but I could be certain of one thing. It was getting colder. Not too much yet, but there was a noticeable change from the previous days. That day, or those next few hours, were full of nothing but changes. There were fewer guards, and the ones left were simultaneously more strict and more distracted than usual. They kept checking the watches on their wrists, pulling out their phones and losing their patience at the smallest disturbance, and there were plenty of those. Everyone psychologically unstable was worse than ever. But even the most reasonable people in the prison were demanding answers, defying the guards and fighting back. After all, I couldn't have been the only one that noticed the sudden lack of guards around the prison. On top of everything else going on, we were still without power. No lights, no computers, phones dying halfway through the shift of the regular staff, and failures in the security system. I'd signed up to work in the kitchens of the prison, so I saw firsthand how some of the food started going bad after more than 24 hours in a fridge that didn't work. A lot of stuff was frozen, but how long could it last? And the fresh vegetables and supplies that arrived every morning hadn't shown up since the incident. We wouldn't last long like this. We weren't among the best equipped prisons in the country, but I knew for a fact that there were others that had to be doing much worse than us. Life like this was unsustainable. That day, there were more altercations and conflicts than I'd seen in all my months in prison put together. Everyone was hypersensitive and ready to fight back at the smallest temptation. The lack of sun made everyone look darker, crueler, and a little less human. It was a miracle that I had managed to stay out of most fights. Our activities got cancelled even earlier that day, and I returned to my cell exhausted, but with only a few scratches on me. I was so done with this strange new routine, and it was the first time in a long time that I felt violently frustrated by being in prison. Guilt and depression had tricked me into accepting my new life, but this was something else. This was going to drive me mad. I was desperate to do something, to be useful, to fight back. I was in the middle of those thoughts, completely detached from what time of the day it could possibly be, when I heard a strange noise. It came from the outside, and it was louder than anything I had ever heard. It was as if a jet was flying right next to my ear. I ran toward the window, but I couldn't see anything. The prison came alive. People started to scream in fright or hope. I couldn't know for certain. And then the night sky was illuminated for one blissful second. Everyone was washed in an orange glow, and I thought, this is it. We're going to be free. A miracle happened. But just as swiftly as it came, the light disappeared all over again. We were thrown back into that soulless gloom. I didn't know what had happened exactly, but I was smart enough to imagine missiles flying through the sky to attack a threat, and failing in their mission. I fell asleep disheartened and hopeless. I told myself that I wouldn't be surprised when they woke us up again and the shadows outside were still firmly in place. And yet, the call from the guards shocked me profoundly. It was mostly due to the fact that it came accompanied by the sound of keys on the lock of my door. They were opening up my cell. What's this? I wondered, stumbling out of bed and still half asleep. What's going on? Mercy, the warden answered. Mercy. I echoed the word, feeling its glorious taste on my tongue. But I was dumbfounded. This didn't make sense. This never happened. I was standing at the open door of my cell, watching as a group of guards escorted the warden along the hallway, opening one door after the other, letting almost everyone out. Mercy? For me? For everyone? I asked, chasing after the warden. One of the guards pushed me so I wouldn't get too close, but nothing more than that. For everyone that won't make things even more difficult for the rest of the world outside. There was nothing I could answer. All I could do was follow the warden, like everyone else, until we found ourselves in the courtyard of the prison. Not everyone was outside, but there were dozens of us, maybe a little more than 100. It was the strangest sight to see everyone mingling like that from all the sectors of the prison. Men and women of all kinds. Well, everyone that wouldn't be a problem to the rest of the world, like the warden said. I guessed that meant everyone locked up for minor crimes. This could be noticed by the calm that reigned over us, even though the number of guards was even lower than the day before. Surely they had better places to be in these strange times. Though maybe we were also peaceful due to the fact that we were all intrigued and also exhausted. I didn't even know for sure if they woke us up in the middle of the night for this or if it was early morning. I guessed it didn't matter anymore. It was all the same, one endless night of confusion and fear.
All right, everyone, listen up. This is important news and I won't be repeating myself,
the warden said, and just like clockwork, everyone seemed to lean in closer to hear him better.
You don't need me to tell you that there's something very wrong with the sky above us. You can see it,
he said. Again, as if we shared the same mind, we all looked up at the pitch black sky above us. I wasn't the only one that shivered at the sight. The lack of clouds, sun, moon or stars was unnerving, to say the least.
You might want an explanation, but the full truth is that I don't have it,
the warden continued talking.
Something, we don't know what, came out of nowhere and blocked our entire planet from the sun. We don't know what it is, why it is here, when it is going to leave or how to get rid of it. The government isn't saying any more than that. Now, you can't believe they don't want to say more, or that they truly don't know more. Whatever you find most reassuring. Either way, they're telling everyone to keep calm. But they also started firing missiles at the sky, and that didn't work, so maybe it really is time to be afraid. Maybe it is time to cling to your loved ones. Hope for the best, and prepare for the worst. So, go. Get out of here. Do what you have to do before we run out of time.
For one blissful second, nobody reacted and nobody moved. Of course, we couldn't believe it. Freedom, given to us just like that. So easily. But with the bittersweet taste of knowing we were free only because people were starting to fear that... What? That the world was ending? It almost felt like a joke. Then we all heard at once the sound of the guards opening the gates of the courtyard, the ones that led to a driveway and out of the prison. That was when all hell broke loose. Half of the people ran towards the gates, pushing each other with everything they had in order to be the first ones, scared of this actually being a joke or the warden suddenly changing his mind. As if that wasn't chaos enough, I was surprised to see some people doing the exact opposite. If I hadn't been close enough to the makeshift stage where the warden was, then I wouldn't have understood what these people were doing.
No! No! What the hell are you doing?
I heard the warden exclaim as the guards tried to keep people from throwing themselves at his feet.
No! I don't care about what your religion told you. I don't care if it's the apocalypse. Get away from me!
He went on, trying to move away from the small crowd begging at him.
This is not a doomsday bunker. This is a prison. Don't you want to leave? Don't you want your freedom?
I couldn't stay to listen to any more of that. Maybe they had a point. The prison did look like a very safe building to hide in if the world was ending, but I had better places to be, regardless of the level of security on it. The initial shock was over, and the first wave of frantic inmates was out of the gates. I was able to limp forward along with the rest of them, slowly at first, stumbling against each other, brushing our shoulders and repeatedly looking back. The sun should have been shining, and we should have been laughing, dancing and squinting against the blinding sunlight that welcomed us as we escaped our bleak confinement. But there was none of that. The outside was every bit as dark and depressing as the inside of the prison, if not more. Still, we were outside. We were free. That much was undeniable. Little by little, we were all infected by the wild excitement of our peers. Our slow steps got faster and faster, and soon enough all of us were running as fast as we could. Some of us laughing, most of us crying, everyone looking forward to everything that could be waiting for us. Freedom at last. There was no riding off into the sunset, of course, not with the complete absence of the sun. But if this had been a movie, that would have been the happy ending. And then the rain came. It was only a few drops at first, just enough so the handful of us that noticed it slowed down. But then it fell on us all at once. It was a downpour. Nothing gentle or gradual about it. The skies, whatever they had turned into, opened up, and a storm attacked the ex-inmates just minutes after our first taste of freedom. The storm was merciless, the worst I had ever seen. The cold raindrops fell on us like needles, and the temperature dropped drastically, leaving us shivering in our drenched clothes. There was a long stretch of empty land between the prison and the city, and in a matter of minutes it turned into a muddy nightmare, a swamp where all of us stumbled, fell, dragged ourselves over our hands and knees, anything to get back home. I wasn't sure how much time passed. I was seeing fewer people around me. But then, something changed in the sky above us. Something much different and deadlier than the rain started to fall down. Through the roaring of the storm, I heard everyone around me start screaming in horror. I looked up and saw them. It looked like countless missiles raining down on us from the black sky. All the ex-inmates that escaped the prison with me screamed and ran away aimlessly, trying to hide from the upcoming doom. I imitated everyone else. I threw myself to the ground, just a few meters from the spot where one of the missiles landed. But that was it. They landed on the ground. They didn't explode. There was no final blast that destroyed our world forever. Nothing like that. Cautiously, all of us raised our heads from the ground, looking at each other, and then fearfully glanced at whatever it was that fell from the sky. The answer wasn't obvious. Aliens? Robots? Machines? A combination of each? We didn't have time to figure it out. The things that fell from our darkened sky were about 20 feet tall. They stood on a pair of metallic legs, thin, but with sharp ends which reminded me of an insect. At the top of the legs, there seemed to be a small cabin, a metal box with mysterious insides. At the very top of the strange apparatus, there was a sort of antenna with a bright red spot at the top. From each of those boxes, a pair of flashlights illuminated the area in front of them. It was a relief to see some kind of light in the middle of that perpetual dusk, until we were forced to understand that the flashlights were actually the equivalent of a sniper's vision. All the machines started shooting at us at the same time. The rain hadn't even stopped, and we were under a brand new storm. The sound was deafening. The fire, the screams, the rattling of the giant machines stepping forward. They weren't missiles. They didn't come from Earth, and they were invading us without mercy. There was very little strategy. The machines were shooting anything that moved, and it was pure chaos. Our chances of survival lowered with each passing second, but our panic increased beyond reason. The adrenaline pushed us forward against all the odds. I got off the floor and started running with everything I had. My legs ached and my lungs were burning, but I never stopped, hesitated or looked back. I stumbled every few meters, slipping on the mud or crashing against a dead body, but I always got back up. out of the hundreds that were freed from the prison. I guessed that maybe a dozen of us reached the city. It was a massacre unlike anything I had ever witnessed, and it was far from over. Those unexplainable machines fell all over the city too. They were patrolling the streets, aiming their lights at the building's windows and shooting everything that made a single move. When I reached the city, I felt my heart break in my chest. This wasn't the meteorological phenomenon I imagined on the first day. This was the end of the world. The city was in shambles. The rain hadn't stopped, but even that wasn't enough to put out the fires all over the city. Buildings burning, collapsing and turning to ashes in front of me. Abandoned cars, dead bodies on the streets and little children crying in dark alleyways. And I was just another one of them. I reached the outskirts of the city, the industrial area, and I managed to hide between two big rubbish containers. The smell was disgusting, and the rain had made a mess of it all. I was probably lying in a pool of rubbish from all the past week, but I welcomed the momentary feeling of safety. I was shaking so much as a result of the fear, the absurd cold, my wet clothes and the open wounds on my hands and knees from all the times I fell before I got there. There were many bloodstains on my trousers, but I assumed most of the blood wasn't mine, but of all the corpses I stumbled with. Seeing my current conditions and having, for the first time in God knows how many hours, a moment to think, I simply broke down crying. Fuck. I cried for the safety of the prison I left behind. Of all the people just like me that died on the way here. For all the innocents on the streets. And for our doomed planet. I fell asleep among the rubbish, and the only mercy I had was that I slept like a log. It made sense, considering how exhausted I was after running for my life the entire way from the prison back to the city. I woke up shivering though, and my first rational thought was wondering how much more and how much faster the temperature would drop before we couldn't take it anymore. I desperately missed the warmth of the sun. I thought being locked up in prison was bad, but this was unlike anything I had ever imagined. My growling stomach fully woke me up and made me realise I couldn't exactly remember my last meal. I stood up slowly, with trembling legs and aching muscles. I accurately guessed that if the world fell apart, then the rubbish in these big containers hadn't been picked up in the last couple of days. At the very top of it, I managed to pick up recent enough scraps that I miraculously managed to keep down without throwing up at the awful scent. At least it would keep me alive. As if everything wasn't already dehumanizing enough, I convinced myself to dig through the rubbish just a little bit more, but at last I found what I'd been searching for. A newspaper from the day after the eclipse. How much time had passed since then? A day? 2, 3, 4? I didn't even know. How long did I stay hiding in that dirty alleyway? I couldn't be certain. While reading, I learned a few facts that didn't really make things better. At least that first day, nobody still knew for sure what had blocked our view from the sun. The most popular theory was that a cloud of an unknown material from outer space was attracted by the gravity of our planet. It chased us like a moon and grew with every passing second, but it wasn't entirely solid. Of course, there were also people claiming we had angered the gods, or that it was the work of the Russians, Chinese, the CIA, some small country in the Balkans, depending on where you read your news. The conclusion was clear. Nobody knew what it was, or how to get rid of it. The governments wasted too much time blaming each other, and if the situation continued, we could expect a global collapse. Well, that newspaper was clearly old. I was seeing the collapse all around me, and I'd wasted enough time. I needed to get home. I still had a mother and younger sister, or so I hoped. I walked slowly, cowering around the corners and waiting long minutes before taking any risk. The giant killing machines that fell from the sky were still patrolling the streets. Every other minute I could hear a new onslaught of projectiles fired from the machines at a poor soul that got caught moving on the deserted streets. My journey back home was excruciating, and so slow that I probably lost another day, even though days had lost all meaning. We only had this relentless night. I learned a lot about human nature on my way home. Most of the inmates died on the way here, and yet it was obvious that some of the most unspeakable crimes weren't even committed by the machines. I walked past bodies with their throats slit open, stabbed to death, and robbed of the clothes they wore. I had to hide from the machines as well as from other people more desperate and violent than me. But for the first time in a long time, I finally had a reason to keep moving forward. I wasn't the only one with a newfound motivation to fight. Despite the cruelty and despair in the streets, people were finding ways to survive and help each other. On every other corner of the street, I heard whispers. Groups of people hiding in the dark, exchanging pieces of food or blankets, softly opening the doors of their basements to hide complete strangers in the safety of their devastated homes. They were all connected, and I had to believe the future of our planet depended on them. But I couldn't join. This wasn't my world anymore. I just had to make sure I could help my mother and my sister. I was overwhelmed with fear, obviously. I thought I would get there too late, find my mother and sister already dead, killed by the machines, desperate robbers, or any other tragic consequence of this infinite night. It didn't occur to me that I might arrive at the exact moment that my old house was caught under attack. I heard the sound of a machine shooting at a building, but I kept my hope until the very last second when I turned a corner and saw it clear as it was. 2 sharp legs, 20 feet tall, a light aimed at the door of my house, and an endless stream of projectiles hitting the front wall. Someone inside the house must have been caught looking out the window, but I had to hope they had ducked in time. But in time for what? I wondered. The machine could demolish that wall, like many others before, in just a few minutes more. They were doomed. And what could I do? That metallic monster of the night had already spotted them. Distracting it wouldn't be enough, but what else did I have? Even if I had a weapon, nothing could be done. I was just standing behind a building like the coward I had always been, but the building, it was 3 stories tall, taller than the enemy, and the stairs of the fire escape were right above me. Time moved in slow motion for me. Every step felt endless, and every second lasted a lifetime. I was more scared than ever before, but I finally reached the top of the building. The rain had stopped, and the scent of smoke and destruction lingered in the air. My entire body ached, but I used my last bit of strength to run as fast as I could toward the edge and then jump from the roof of the building. I was suspended in the air for one terrifying second and then crashed and landed atop the machine attacking my house. That cold metal was an excruciating place to land, but I made it. It was a suicide mission, and I knew it very well, but the monster didn't even react. It ignored me right until the moment that I started yelling with all my repressed agony, and I pulled at the red top of the antenna on it and forcibly tore it from the rest of the structure. It went out like a light bulb. Everything went still. I had discovered a way to stop them. As I tried to regain my breath, I felt a sudden light on me like a miracle, and I finally understood. Deactivating these monsters was the key. It would open the sky and give us back the sun. I basked on the light, covering every inch of my body for one blissful second, and then I turned to see the other machine standing on the corner of the street. The one that was aiming its light at me. Fuck these alien machines, I thought, as it started blasting away at me. Hey, sci-fi horror fans, it's Thomas. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you'd like to become an official member of our channel, you can do so by clicking on the join button. Memberships start at only $5. Until next time, everyone, and remember, stay cosmic.